Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Retravel Live. Super excited about the conversation we're about to have. And if you're listening to me right now, you hear me killing time as we're waiting for people to go ahead and join this space so we can go ahead and get started. With that said, we have a ton to go over, so I think that it's time to get this conversation started. And so first things first, I do want to take an opportunity to introduce myself to everyone who's joining us for Retravel Live today. My name is Chris Martinez, and I'm the mayor of G Adventures. That's right, you heard it right. There is a mayor of G Adventures, and that is me. And what does that mean? Well, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of championing the purpose-driven, passionate people that make up G Nation, or the people that work for G Adventures. In addition, I also have the opportunity from time to time to engage with some fine folks like all of you for really important conversations and events like today. And on that note, I do want to take the opportunity to welcome all of you. We're expecting about 1,000 people joining us today. And we want to take an opportunity to say hello to all of you that are joining from Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States. But as a travel organization and on the topic of travel, we actually have a very diverse audience today, including folks from the Bahamas, Latvia, Namibia, and Vietnam as well. So we do want to thank you all for joining us, and we sincerely hope that you and your families are well and safe at this time. And we genuinely appreciate you taking your valuable time to join us today for the first in our new virtual event series called Retravel Live. Before we go ahead and get started, and I pass this on to our panelists, I do want to go through a few housekeeping items to make sure you have the best possible viewing experience. So that everyone's aware, we have collected all of your questions in advance, and we're going to do our best to address as many of those as possible throughout this broadcast. In addition, if you didn't have the opportunity to submit a question, or maybe you're inspired by the really thought-provoking conversation that's about to happen, go ahead and take advantage of the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll be taking your questions throughout the event, and we'll try to answer some of those towards the end of the event today as well. A couple more notes. We recommend that you select fit to screen in your view options in Zoom to make sure you can capture all of the action. And just as a reminder, or just so everyone knows, we will be recording this event. So that way, if you find any gems, if there's something you want to refer back to, if you want to share this with a friend, or if you have to stop and go do something because we are all living our remote reality right now, it's perfectly fine. That'll be available for you shortly via our YouTube channel. So enough of me rambling. Let's go ahead and start getting into this. I'd like to start by introducing our panel today, the people that you've come today to see. And I'd like to start by introducing our host and moderator today, Bruce Poon Tip. So Bruce is the author of Looptail and is an entrepreneur and philanthropist, but you all probably know him best as the founder of G Adventures, which was founded 30 years ago this year. And boy, what a year it has been. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Thank you. Joining Bruce today on the panel, we have Elizabeth Becker, who's the author of Overbooked, The Exploding Business of Travel and Tourism. Elizabeth, as mentioned, is the author of Overbooked, which was an Amazon Book of the Year and was hailed by author Arthur Frommer as required reading about the future of global tourism. In 2019, Condé Nast Traveler named Elizabeth one of the people who has changed how the world travels because of her book, and one of the most powerful women in the travel world for emphasizing a conservationist ethic in tourism. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Pleasure to have you. We're also joined today by Juliet Kinsman, a sustainability editor for Condé Nast Traveler, United Kingdom. Juliet is a UK-based writer, journalist, and sustainable travel expert. As the first sustainability editor of Condé Nast Traveler and a regular guest for BBC Radio London, she is passionate about inspiring people to make travel a force for good. Her new book, The Green Edit, Travel, Easy Tips for the Eco-Friendly Traveler, looks at how travelers can change their travel habits to have a more positive impact. Welcome, Juliet.
Thanks.
And finally, and last but not least, we are joined today by George Stone, who is the editor-in-chief of National Geographic Traveler US. A globe-trotting writer and editor for more than 25 years, George directs National Geographic's travel media strategy across platforms and drives the publication of content that helps readers explore the world with an ethic of conservation. Nominated 3 times for a National Magazine Award with 1 win, George leads the development of journalistically sound storytelling that sparks curiosity and adventure. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
And on that note, I'm going to pass it to Bruce to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to all of our people attending today, and it's great to see all of you. Elizabeth, we have not met before. It's great to meet you online. And Julia, it's great to see you, and George, great to see you again. So moderating is new for me. So, in this new digital world of doing presentations, we all are learning new skills. And moderating is fun. I'm used to getting asked the questions, but now I'm reviewing what I get to ask you. So welcome and thank you for all of you for taking the time to be with us. We have an amazing audience, and the numbers are still growing, I can see. But we've had a couple questions. I know we're going to get to questions later, but at the beginning of when we announced this, we already got some questions from a lot of the viewers that are attending today. And a lot of them were about ethics of traveling during the pandemic. So I guess we're coming to the conclusion that this pandemic, isn't a 3, 4, 5, even 6-month issue. Back in March when it started to escalate, I don't think anyone would think that, 6 months later, we'd still be in a global lockdown and borders would be closed. And so, people are starting to think now about just actually dealing with this pandemic in the short term and midterm, and the ethics of traveling during the pandemic until we can find a vaccine and achieve herd immunity and go past it. As we also have to be vigilant with international tourism and want to get back to travel. I'm just asking. We'll start off with just asking some of your thoughts on that, and we'll start with Juliet. Ethics of traveling during the pandemic. What are your thoughts on that?
That's such a great question, and the first time anyone has mentioned that in the many talks that we've had is such a great question. And ethics, and it's something I think about in terms of responsibility as an individual. It's interesting because during this time, it's been such a divisive time. Let's be honest, and we have different morals and ethics. But I think what's been important has been we've sort of learned, or I hope many of us have really started to think about the we and not just me. And so I personally have tried to park my judgment throughout this time, and I really feel about travel, I say to people, because they ask my opinion all the time, and I say, I cannot tell you whether you could or should travel to that destination. You do what's right for you. However, as with anything in life, you just think, if you are ever putting anyone else in danger, and therefore making a decision that they're not complicit with, well, I guess you shouldn't do it. So it's an interesting topic. No one has tackled this, and thank you for bringing it up. In terms of ethics, I feel a huge responsibility always around helping those who are less fortunate and around wealth distribution. And I'm lucky enough to have read your books, Bruce, and I recommend them all the time. Elizabeth, I haven't read yours yet. And obviously you talk very much about that and leakage and all those aspects. So as someone who lives in a country that does have money, I'm really sad I'm not able to get to a country that does not and share that. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Elizabeth, you wrote this amazing book, and we'll get to that in a second, actually. But ethics is obviously something that because everyone wants to travel, and now, there's, I think for the first time, I took my first plane in 6 months just last week. And for the first time in my life, there was this, a feeling of, everything that I did was, being monitored and watched. And the question of ethics, how do you look at it based on, your experience with, around your book as well, Overtourism?
Well, thank you, Bruce. And I'd like to build off what Julia just said. When people have asked me the same question, which is fascinating, I always say it's time to start thinking as a citizen. And like George, I'm in Washington, D.C. And this is a country where we're still arguing over masks. And I would like all of us to think that we're citizens of where we are and where we are going to visit. So if you're visiting somewhere, you follow those rules. You may not like them. You may argue with them. You may think you can avoid the 2-week quarantine. No, that's not ethical as well as not legal. So one is in citizenship, and two, on the income distribution that Juliet mentioned. I think there are two ways you can help. One, in your own community, which in fact is a tourist destination wherever we live. So pick out a hospitality place. We have DC Central Kitchen where we give money and that keeps the restaurants going and feeding the homeless. And then pick a country you love. I know which one I sent some money to, and I know which community I helped. That's all I can do. I can't solve the world's problems, but I feel much better thinking of my own city and of the place that I love.
Excellent. And George, there's a buzzword that, tourism always has a new buzzword, whether it's starting back in the mid-90s with ecotourism and responsible and sustainable. And lately, I've heard something called regenerative travel. Regenerative travel. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's a good question. And these words fly around and they become very trendy. So I don't actually like regenerative travel as a word, but I think the problem it's trying to address is the difficulty of coming to terms as an individual and as a consumer with the massive questions about sustainability. Of industrial strength word, and people are always looking for something that's a little bit more graspable than sustainability. And so I think Juliet, in her book, tourists, eco travelers, people with a conscience around the traveling with a lighter footprint is a sort of a softer way to bridge for travelers between massive global problems and what a traveler actually can achieve as an individual person. So as an editor, the word I actually prefer comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a botanist and a biologist, and she talks about bringing in a reciprocal relationship with the planet and with communities. So I actually would substitute regenerative reciprocity because I think that it's really important that travelers, and this maybe keying off what Elizabeth just said, travelers think about the community and their place in the community. They think about themselves as visiting a place where people live and then leaving the place where people continue to live. So, so absorbing your reciprocal relationship, whether it's with the community or with the environment, and really bringing that in to your travels. And again, as Juliet said, thinking about that community, how you spend money, where you spend money, I think is so important. So for me, the easier word is reciprocity, and I kind of like it better. But I do think the conversation right now is about community, and as we're not able to travel so much, at least, it gives us this great opportunity to think about community in the world and the role of a traveler, of a tourist, and then indeed the sustainability of the community. But I think reciprocity is an easier tool to get there.
Excellent, George. Thank you. Now, as businesses, as tour operators, speaking on the tour operator side, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the restart of travel. When this pandemic escalated and we started achieving things that we never thought possible, like the banning of countries and the banning of citizens leaving countries, which I just never thought would even be possible. As companies, we were forced into talking points. And these talking points are things like, we'll get through this together. We'll get better on the other side of this. We're going to be stronger because of this. And I don't even know what that means. And I don't know if anyone even knew what that means. And now that we're 6 months into this, we've dealt with a lot of hardship, and there's still obviously more to come. We can look forward and start looking at opportunities. I think there's a great opportunity. I'm of the mindset that travel wasn't in a great place before this forced kind of pause. And so there's great opportunity for us to rethink and restart. And there's all this talk about how we restart and what that looks like. But really, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be stronger, or the opportunities on the other side, and how can we be stronger, on the other side of this? I'll start with you, Elizabeth.
I suppose I totally agree with you that it was not in a great space. And I think one of the things that I have recommended is that travel take itself more seriously. That travel is this major industry. It should be sitting at the table of governments. Departments of tourism are not just PR. When the climate emergency comes up, who is representing travel? And travel shouldn't consider itself just lobbying so you can get better breaks here or there and make a bigger profit. Travel should take, the industry is a serious industry. It should be talking about energy. It should be talking about transportation. When climate emergency things come up on wildfires, travel should be sitting at the table. So I think the restart has to be taking part in government decisions, be it local, regional, national, and even international.
George or Juliet, like this is what I did mention at the beginning, like me just firing out questions. Please feel free as well to just add and jump into the conversation and create a dialogue, if you will. But and again, I think this is a really important question about this. Everyone's claiming the opportunities to of being stronger on the other side of this. What does that mean to you, Juliet?
Thank you. This is so interesting, everything that we're discussing. Thank you. I think, what's important is talking about regenerative. You were talking about the buzzword. Sustainability has become a buzzword. It's meaningless, just like we all know luxury is. So what I try and think about is within sustainability, we think about impact. So social impact, environmental impact, economic impact. So I think exactly as Elizabeth says, within those, if you're going to have impact in those ways, you need to think about the individual's impact, the government's impact, and the suppliers within our case in the travel industry. So how do we get all of those to think about these things? And, I think sometimes we feel helpless. And I think another thing to really think about is this use of all these platitudes. You introduced me very kindly and generously as somebody who believes in the travel as a force for good, but that's such a cliche already, and what does that mean? And I think it's all about storytelling, and through these stories is educating each other, exchanging ideas, more conversation, more two-way conversations about impact, actually, what's good, what's having a good effect and what's having a bad effect, and educating ourselves. And I think that's why these webinars, I think they're a wonderful thing to do, exchange ideas. It's kind of just a side note on all of this. But thank you. And it's really important to open our minds and exactly that, challenge government. And the travel industry is what a wonderful setting and scene to be doing these things, to be educating and sharing stories. It's really important. And again, another, not cliche, but everyone wheeled out the 1 in 10 people works in tourism. That is profound. I mean, a side conversation would be, I don't believe that many people should work in tourism. Actually, I think that's a failed system. I think that a lot of those people within tourism should be helped to work in agriculture or in manufacturing in a more responsible way. But that's a bigger conversation. So I just think this is an incredible opportunity, as you say, to share important stories through tourism.
Yeah, you hit on exactly I think the key tool that we can use in our industry. I mean, we're representing travel media, travel writers, journalism. It is the power of the story. And so if you look at it from the top down, I couldn't agree with Elizabeth more that travel tourism needs to have a seat at the table in government action. What we can do, though, in this unique period is to pivot in our storytelling to surface more of these relevant stories, to do more community reporting or impact reporting, so that we can push that dialogue along. And so that, I think, is what the best travel media titles are doing right now, is they're saying, wait a minute, we don't need to do top 10s. I mean, people aren't going anywhere anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how the lack of revenue, the lack of tourism is impacting the community. We're going to talk about the structure of the economy regionally, as it relates to tourism, or the implication of tourism on conservation initiatives within fragile regions. So I think that this is actually a strangely opportune time for travel media to lean in and then to surface these big conversations. And what I can say for sure is that readers are on board. I think the travel readers have gotten more sophisticated. They know where to go for their top 10 lists and their recommendations of restaurants and cafes and things like that. But a deeper narrative that has more texture and more context about the role of the traveler, the role of the community in this economy is what I think travelers want now, and it will affect their journeys and their decisions into the future. So it comes to storytelling right now for us.
Excellent. So just look, the pandemic, just pulling it back a bit about the pandemic itself, because everyone's talking about the short term, because everyone's, everyone wants to travel again. I mean, everyone's sick of being at home. Everyone's tired of their apartments or the rooms that they're confined to now, and people are dying to travel. So, there's a short term and there's a midterm solution, but long term, do you think this the pandemic will have an impact on tourists, or an impact on how we travel, or an impact even on the buying patterns? Or right now, of course, I don't think anyone can imagine putting their 80-year-old parents on a cruise because of the PR that was at the height of the pandemic. But long term, do you think that there'll be changes and they'll on how people travel because of this pandemic? And we'll start with you, Juliet.
I'm trying to frame an answer to that. That didn't sound too extreme, but the only way that travel can change and will change for the better is if we rewire capitalism. Is that too much to ask? And all I'm saying is that us as consumers are more conscious, and we use business, we choose businesses that are impacting change. I think that's, and also the other thing, somebody I do emphasize the need for more sustainable and responsible travel. And if we want to have a less of an impact on the environment, that means less people traveling, spending more money where they go. So low traffic, high spend. But that's very elitist and terribly exclusive. And I want everyone to travel. That's the way we share ideas, and we only understand the world if we see it through other people's eyes. So it's complex. I think it's really just about taking a responsibility for understanding. You talk about the different businesses, and look, I'm a great fan of G, that, and you haven't asked me to toot your horn, but I have to say, you're an exemplar in terms of that supply chain, and that's what I think the consumer, and I'm not sure who's in the audience, whether they're people who are helping, they're all different types of people, and but each of us can make a decision to support a good business and look at what that supply chain is. Just as we might not eat battery farmed chicken because we care about welfare, we have to do that with people in the travel supply chain. Just like we wouldn't wear fast fashion, we have to think about the supply chain. And I think that's what we need to do.
But Juliet, I guess the question is, do you think that people will change? Because of this? I mean, the question being, yes, I think that we kind of always, all of us have been on that path in hopes that people will change, in hopes that the market will pivot in some ways. But, there's all this talk about, good coming out of an unfortunate situation here. But long term, do you think that the consumer will change at all? Or do we have short-term memories and we'll go back to the
word consumer? And that's, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Not unless we can actually shift the perspective of the consumer to understand that it's not just about what's good for us and what's great for the world is also better for us. And it's a complex, nuanced conversation and education piece. And I hope that's why we talk about stories, and that's what we all do, is to make them care, make them feel something.
And Elizabeth, can you add to that? I see you nodding your head.
Yes, I want to add a different perspective that the consumer may have to change. The borders are not going to open altogether all at once. Countries are not going to be the way they were in 2019. The geopolitical reality I don't know what it's going to be, but I don't think 2019 is going to be the base. So first of all, we're going to see travel much more as a privilege. And I'm not saying this as an elitist. I'm saying this as someone who remembers when the Berlin Wall went down and the Cold War ended and finally we had open borders. I don't think we're going to go back right away to that. Secondly, I think people in this sense of privilege, people are going to take fewer trips and stay longer. I agree with Juliet on that one. And secondly, this is an economic catastrophe for so many people. People aren't going to have the money to spend on travel. I don't know how long it's going to take. So, and then the wild card, of course, of climate emergency. So I think the consumer is, because of these outside influences, the consumer is going to have to reimagine what's important to travel, maybe do a lot more homework. You know, the guidebook is not going to tell you whether there's going to be a problem, political problem here or whatever problem there. Maybe we're going to learn the languages a little better. It's going to be a little deeper because we're going to have to take our time because we're not going to have the choices we had in 2019.
Yeah, and to add to that, the vendors have to change as well. So the promises and the delivery that players in the hospitality industry make and that follow through on are really going to have to be more credible and more backed up. So I think that the consumers who've done the research that Elizabeth is pointing to will expect more, might be willing to pay more, but they will absolutely demand that from their vendors. So when they're signing on to a tour package, checking into a hotel, flying on a plane, they're putting a lot more trust in that partner than ever before. So I think that's going to be a really big conversation, and there's probably going to have to be ways to measure that into the future to give consumers more confidence in the choices they're making.
Excellent. So we have a lot of travelers attending today. So let's shift to a bit of advice that we can give. Elizabeth, you wrote this amazing book, Overtourism, or Overbooked, sorry, which was featured, I don't know, I would say you spearheaded, I don't know if you actually coined the term overtourism, but you certainly were kind of a leader in I would say buzzword, but the issues facing overbooked destinations. Just speaking on that, how can we plan for a better future to avoid inequality in the distribution of tourism dollars? I mean, that's before this pandemic and now after the pandemic.
First of all, avoid. This is not going to make our friends at Marriott happy, but avoid all the chain hotels to go local. I mean, all of people on this panel know how to do local, how to do I remember my first professional trip for that book on China. I asked when I went to China, I asked my travel agent to please book me only in Chinese non-international hotel chains. It was difficult. So you have to go out of your way, but overall, in terms of what you do, in a sense, I would sort of like to, right now, I'd like to fly to Barcelona as a journalist and see how are they reacting now, because that's one of the main hotspots. The people were so politically active about overtourism. They had a mayor who was elected on that platform. I would like to do research and then come back and give you the answer. Say, Bruce, I've learned so much about what the local community wants. I've learned so much what helps the community and what hurts the community, because the pandemic gave me this laboratory, this amazing laboratory where I can see, oh, they want this kind of tourism back and they don't ever want this kind of tourism back. And this section of the town is better off and this one is hurting and they don't like all these cruise ships, or they want this. It's a laboratory that it kills me that I can't go. And maybe I'd make a side trip to Venice on the way home. But I think we are at the, George, would you publish my article?
Yeah.
So George, more meaningful travel is something that's thrown around a lot, purposeful travel, where we've just come out of, the height of bucket list travel and Instagram moments. And, I read a frightening survey that was done. I don't know if it was reliable, mind you, but about the next generation of millennials traveling, close to 60% said they wouldn't even want to go somewhere if they couldn't put it on Instagram. If there was a ban on Instagram, they wouldn't want to see a certain destination, which is horrifying to think that that's what's motivating decisions. As people and travelers that are tuning in today, talk about wanting to be more purposeful in their decisions or more informed or empathetic, whatever it is, when they travel, how do they do that and what does that mean to you?
Well, I do think that travel is a practice, like a lot of other things, and often you aren't very good the first time you do something. The goal is to get better as you move along, but the industrial scale of travel that we're lamenting pre-pandemic definitely creates all sorts of conditions, for mounting bad behavior with surging impacts that are negative on destinations around the world. So, while we've been talking, I've been checking out some of the QAs, and a guy named William Wood says that travel may have to become more elite, that it's too cheap at the expense of the environment, and travel should be more expensive, and this will make people take travel more seriously. I mean, that echoes something Elizabeth said about privilege, and it's true, and it's sad because it's different, but absolutely everything has changed because of the pandemic. And so jetting around, I'm almost a little bit awkward when I look at my pictures from last year. It's awkward to see how many places I went. I went to a lot of places, and I'm not sure if that's so good, and I'm not even sure if that's consistent with the things I normally say out loud. So this idea of being more conscientious in your journeys, of focusing on your impact, of the thought I have because of Robin Wall Kilmer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass about reciprocity and how we relate to communities and the environment, I think really has to be considered more deeply. And there's also beyond that philosophy or whatever of that, there are real impacts. And so we just did a story. We'd love to, Elizabeth, I'll take you up on your in overtourism. We did a story on Majorca and then a story on Greece, different places that are contending in not philosophical terms, very real terms, in how they will recover, rebuild, and whose voices are going to be loudest post-pandemic. So, so even if you start out with sort of softer ideas about what would be wonderful, there are real conversations happening around the world about what the structures of tourism will be into the future.
If I could just add one thing on the elitism questions, this is where close contact to the local community can be very helpful, because you can have more environmentally community-oriented, low-cost travel and tourism. It does not have to be all in drive-by tourism. It can be, okay, local community. I mean, Bordeaux, the city of Bordeaux was very conscientious of this. Make sure you have the backpack welcomed. Make sure you have a way that the local community can help the people with a lower budget. Does not have to be elitist, but it's going to take some planning, just like George said.
I'd love to add something about what this time has taught me, and if people are listening, hoping for inspiration and advice about what to do and where to go, ask yourself why you want to travel. And I've just been thinking about what you've been saying. And, if you think about it, as human beings, we're the only animals who explore for the sake of exploring. Every other creature has a purpose, but we do it because we're curious or we want to experience things. Ask yourself why you want to travel. And put the elitism aside. Do you want to see a new landscape? I certainly do. I live in a city in a basement flat. I wanted to see forest. I wanted to see trees. I also, what I've been really missing, because this time has really taught us to think about what we need from travel. And I really, I've been to Scotland and Wales. I've had great trips this year. I but I am craving that sort of taste, those smell, those sounds of different places that transport me and remind me what a rich world this is. And I think it's not about how much you're spending or what you're saying, whether it's possible. It's looking at why we want to travel. And
yeah. And those are excellent points. Elizabeth, I just want to go back to you because you brought up local communities. And one of the questions that we got a lot before, besides the questions we have live here today, was about how people can actually help local communities now, before travel returns. So everyone is hearing of the devastation the tourism stopping has caused. Is there any advice you can give to travelers who are asking that question? Like they want to be proactive now. They want to do something now before travel returns. And what can they do?
So the question is, you're sitting there in Toronto or Washington, D.C. You can't, especially we Americans, our passport doesn't get us anywhere. How do we help the community we like so much in Spain? How do we help? Yeah, and that wonderful farm we went to in Italy, or maybe Thailand.
Or even more in a general sense. You want to do something. It might not be a place you've actually been to yet, or a place you were planning to go, but you're reading about now about local communities being devastated. Yeah. And if there anything people can do now to advise?
I always think, I wouldn't do something general, because I have a hard time just telling you which website's going to answer your question. It's more pick a place. Nepal. Help the tour guides in Nepal that used to take people up the Himalayas to Mount Everest. Pick a place. Bhutan. Maybe you want to help something there. I would pick a place, even if you hadn't been there, and then find the charity that helps the local people. It doesn't have to be made up. I used to be on the board of Oxfam America, a wonderful charity that helps all kinds of places and that does the hospitality center. But there's unions. The figure that Juliet was just mentioning, about 1 out of 10 workers are in the hospitality. We know that through the International Labor Organization in Geneva, and they can tell you which unions are helping the hospitality workers. In the United States, it's Unite Here. Those are the people who are out of work in hotels. Disneyland just dropped off 28,000 people. They have a union that you can help. So do a little homework, but I would go for the low end people to help them, because they're usually the ones who are hit the most. And then again, if you know a place that you visited and you want to help the local inn, the local hotel, that's why I don't have anything more imaginative than that.
We have been doing something that's actually fun during the pandemic. Every month, I try to think of something cool to give $100 to. I mean, it's not a fortune, but it's actually been really fun for me. And then a new month happens. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And so I've given to I gave to Walden Pond, because I always like Walden. They have a literary, whatever. I spent some time in North Carolina, so gave to Appalachian Mountain Conservancy. Mm-hmm. And so things that touch you. I mean, there is no one right best answer, but there is a way to make it actually a sort of experience where you learn a little bit about yourself along the way. Well, what touched me in my travels? And you can recollect some of those memories, and then do a little something that, you're not even on board for. How is that $100 being spent? It's not the big deal. Just make an effort.
I feel very passionately about this, and I'm happy to say that Condé Nast Traveler, if you subscribe to the How to Travel Better newsletters, it's a sustainability themed one. We're going to flag a charity because people want to help, actually. So we're every time it goes out. Is it a week, every month? I don't know. We'll flag, because for me at the moment, my heart is breaking for conservation in Africa. So I don't know how many billions they're not getting this year from tourism. That usually funds a lot of conservation work. If you think about that being connected to biodiversity, which is one of the biggest crises facing us, if you can afford to, you might book a trip to Africa that you will take in 2022 and make sure it's with the right people doing good work, and do that now. That would be my advice. Otherwise, on a small scale, either decide what you personally care about, or you look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and which of those matter to you. I care about the education of young women in remote rural areas. I made a documentary about it last year. And so that particular charity, Education for All in Morocco, is funded by tourism. They have no tourists. So Casbah de Toubkal. I know that Planetera, your own foundation at G Adventures, you do so much work. So I would say decide what you care about, you know, and exactly as George said, if you can afford to, if you can find a way just to choose something, but more importantly than all of this, find it, research it, give them the money, talk about it, share their story with your friends and family. It is incredible. That word of mouth, just talking about issues beyond our borders is one of the most powerful things you can do.
Excellent. Julia, all of this kind of, I just want to go back, we're going back a little bit to when you first said the things about the purposeful travel, being purposeful when you travel. And this kind of links to all of that. And I think it's really important that we try, because we have such an engaged audience who's attending, and we could have an impact on them to make these more purposeful decisions. And I'm of the mindset of, you know, we were in a very dangerous place just before this pandemic as an industry, because the destination was no longer relevant. Sorry. You know, more and more people were choosing amenities over destination. And as a travel industry, the travel industry was forced to sell amenities, whether it's, you know, 10 restaurants on a cruise ship, or indoor surfing, Broadway shows, or, you know, go-kart track racing, indoor surfing, whatever it was. And amenities became the most important things, and the commoditization of travel is, I think, our biggest danger, and it's just a dangerous place to be as an industry. And so, you know, and people, and, you know, price point, all of those things that people are motivated on why they book trips, instead of actually connecting to destinations, on why you want to go there. You know, that old, 10 years ago, you know, most of our travelers would have a story on why they came on this trip. It could have been, I wrote a book report when I was in grade 6 on Galapagos Islands. I've always wanted to go there. Or I met someone when I was young who was from India, and I've always wanted, but we're missing those stories, and we're missing that, the purposeful connection to destinations. I'm just wondering if anyone has any advice to add to how we can encourage people during this pandemic. My fear is that we go back, by the way, and we're going to do predictions in a minute, but my fear is that we have short-term memory. We're just going to go back to where it was as soon as this is all over, or we get a vaccine. But it just takes a small group of people to change, to have to change the landscape of the entire industry. We're not going to stop cruises. We're not going to stop mass tourism. We're not going to stop mainstream tourism. But it just takes a small group of people to change for us to have a massive impact on the landscape and the future of tourism. So I'm just wondering if you could give any advice before we do some predictions on how people can engage more with destination. I'll just throw that up to anyone who wants to kind of put something forward.
Well, as a writer, we just continue to tell stories. I'm in the middle of a couple pieces I'm going to write, and I want to share that. That's why I wrote the book. I'm of the age where I see you guys as following in me, but we cannot do enough of that. And I've written for Condé Nast and for National Geo, and I write for state-owned newspapers too, TV, radio. We just have to continue doing it. And what you said, Bruce, reminded me, for my first chapter of my book, I reminded readers what travel books used to be in the very olden days. The National Geo, I spent a week in your library to look at your old things. It was masses of books about the culture, the history, and maybe 2 or 3 pages at the end about amenities. And that's what we have to do. We have to flip. We don't do the luxury resorts. We go back and we look at the gorgeous African lodges we may visit, but say what they mean for conservation, say what they mean for the local community. Write those kinds of pieces, not just whether or not you got to have a great night's sleep in the bed.
Oh, I agree so wholeheartedly. And look, it wasn't in my intro and I wasn't going to mention it, but you know, my background is actually, I was the founding editor of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which are boutique hotels, and I did that for many years. So it was very much lots of style over substance. And I mean, it's all about how the rooms looked and all the amenities and all of that. And I really believe it's about, you know, and the other thing, Elizabeth, it's wonderful to share these stories. Are people reading them in full? I'm not sure they are. Okay, some are, but I think we need to remind everyone that, you know, inform ourselves, do read more, and do, you know, don't just rely on, sorry to say, I sound so, I don't know, it's just that superficial content. Just look for the real stories, feel something, things that have purpose and meaning as stories, and not just be seduced by very superficial, beautiful images of places, and have these deep conversations. My personal slogan is always stop, think, discuss. Just stop for a moment, really think about things and talk about it with your friends. And, you know, and we just need to inform ourselves better. I mean, definitely read more, but I know people aren't reading as much.
Well, I think for another good practice is, especially during this pandemic when we're restricted in our travels, is to explore the things that are just around you. I've gotten so into state parks and or just wild spaces wherever I've been, and I've only been in Washington and North Carolina. But I mean, the wealth of these parks is and these wild spaces is not only sort of that they're beautiful areas of conservation, but they're soothing your soul. And also when you're there, like, you're not trying to buy something. You're not necessarily trying to eat a donut. You're not, you know, you're not trying to figure out what consumer action to take next. And so I think that there is a valuable reset, and not just in this period, but in exploring the wilderness near you. And I think that will have an impact on where people go, where they choose to go post-pandemic. I mean, are they going to race off on some shopping vendor? Some people, but I think if a lot of people spend a little bit more time outdoors, they will have a more kind of thoughtful approach to, you know, to the next trip that they take. And it might be the Galapagos, and that's great if it is, but they might have the story attached to why they chose to take that trip.
Excellent. I love these answers. I love all of you guys. This is so exciting because I so rarely get to talk to people that believe in the same things that we do and I do. And this has been such a treat. And I wish I could just go on for hours because I actually want to ask questions for my own self, but I'm trying to please an audience at the moment. But we're going to do just a bit of predictions because we are going to take questions from the audience in a moment. But I want to go to just quickly to all three of you. Predictions, 5 years time. So, you know, jump in the time machine and you go 5 years ahead from now. What does travel look like 5 years from now? We will start with Elizabeth.
Oh, I knew you were going to do that to me. I think I'm going to go back to citizens and governments and politics. I think travel, I know so many travel industry people think they're overregulated, but in fact, I think you're going to be embraced by the situation. I can even see days when there'll be no fly days because of the climate. Is that crazy? It sounded crazy in 2019, less crazy now in 2020.
Nothing's crazy anymore.
And I think you're going to have to get used to government border visas. It's not going to, you can't just take it for granted that your passport's going to get there. You're going to have to go through visa things. I think you're going to see, as I said, fewer trips lasting longer. I think that's almost unanimous here. And even our cherished wilderness trips are going to be watched a little bit. You're not going to find Yellowstone crushed with tourists anymore. You're going to have, just think what's happened in the pandemic in the United States, where you have a federal government, a president that is making mincemeat out of our conservation regulations. Has the travel industry said no? They're going to have to get political. I want to see the travel industry as political as anybody else about protecting the planet. And you can't just go to the government because you want, you know, the transportation secretary to help you with this. You have to go and you say, our business is protecting the planet. So I'm going to say politics.
Juliet, 5 years time machine.
Okay, predictions versus manifestations. I'm going to put my rose-tinted spectacles on, and I'm going to say, because of this wonderful conversation, everyone's thought more about the importance of educating young women and girls in remote rural areas, and they're all going to go out and make it their life's purpose to improve that. And in 5 years, as a result of that, women will, and in different countries, will be marrying later, having fewer, healthier children, and they will be contributing better to the economy themselves, having been better educated. They'll be finding more solutions, and there's a big connection, I think people don't realize that yet always, between educating young girls and the climate emergency. I think also, I think we'll have, you know, it's whether you're leaning towards optimism, pessimism, idealist, realist. I think everything Elizabeth said is true. I think that it's pretty hard to second guess what human beings are going to do and what we want them to do. It depends on the politics. It could go either way. No one would have convinced me of, I speak as someone who grew up in New York City and lived in Washington, DC, and whose sister is a politician in New York. No one would have predicted the situation you've got right now. And I just wish every country had a leader that was like a great parent, like you, Bruce, maybe, modeling behavior, inspiring all, because inspiration and giving people optimistic, great messages to incite them to do good things is what we need. And there's way too much negativity and it's killing me. Okay,
Jordan. Last word, 5 years, not the last word. We do have questions from that we're going to get Chris back on here, but 5 years from now, what does travel look like?
I think that we're going to see a better quality of traveler. As someone who is more engaged in the conversations that are relevant to places, someone who has a more nuanced sense of the layers that go into a destination or a travel economy. I think especially in the US, but globally as well, in this period of racial reckoning, someone who really is thinking more critically about communities and identity where they go. So I don't see how we can go through this and not come out touched and moved and changed. So aspirationally, I really want to see travelers at their best in 5 years, asking tough questions, and then that's going to lead to the impacts and the bigger changes that both Julia and Elizabeth have pointed to. So my goal is to try to support that on the individual and collective level of the traveler and the reader.
Love this so much. Chris, we need you back. You guys are amazing. This has been such a treat. You have no idea. I was kind of dreading it, not because of you guys, but just I do moderating. So hard for me to not talk. So just asking questions. This has been such a treat and so fun for me. So Chris, we have some questions.
We do have some questions, and we've also had an amazing conversation thus far. And because of that, and because we have such an engaged audience, we are going to extend this event just a little bit longer. So we marketed this as an hour-long event, and we're just going to bleed a little bit over. And so before we get into the questions, I did want to just leave some messages for anybody who unfortunately does need to step away for the remainder of this session. But the most important message is a massive thank you. So thank you for joining us today and for spending your very valuable time with all of us for Retravel Live. This is the first event in our Retravel Live series, where we'll be addressing the most pressing topics in travel and together looking at how we can solve them so we can retravel the right way. Visit retravellive.com for more details on our next event. And please, in the meantime, be sure to check out Elizabeth's book, Overbooked, The Exploding Business of Travel and Tourism, Juliet's new title, The Green Edit, Travel, Easy Tips for the Eco-Friendly Traveler, and Bruce's Instabook, Unlearn, The Year the Earth Stood Still, which is available for free at www.unlearn.travel. And of course, the brilliant source of travel journalism and inspiration, our friends at nationalgeographic.com. So now that I've shared all of that, I do want to get into some of these audience questions, but again, thank you for those folks who joined and have to step away. So Bruce, we're gonna go ahead and start with a question for you, since you've been moderating. I need to throw something your way now, and this is the words of the person who asked it. So they're putting you on the spot here, but given the conversation about sustainability, reciprocity, and how to ensure the industry has an impact/input or seat at the table, have you thought about changes that G Adventures will make in the future, and anything that you feel comfortable sharing today?
Those conversations are happening now as we kind of, we're in hibernation, like every travel company, waiting for people to want to travel again. But it's given us also a great opportunity to look at how we can do things better. And that's really exciting for us and exciting for me. So, we've had to make some really tough decisions. It's been really hard for the first 3 or 4 months of this pandemic, but we get to be a startup at 30 years old. So at 30 years old, I get to restart everything that I ever wanted to do. As a 30-year-old company, we've made so many decisions over the years to put Band-Aids on problems, and it gets harder and harder to move. But the amazing opportunity for all of us in the travel industry right now is we get to rethink everything with 30 years of experience. So I started G Adventures 30 years ago, and I did the best I could to build an amazing company. I think we did a great job. But now I'm a startup. I'm a startup at 30 years old, and I get to rethink everything. And we look at how we look at leadership. We look at how we look at remote management, offices, space, how we communicate with our customers, how we create dialogue with local communities. All of these things that we always thought we should do more of or thought we could do better, we have every opportunity to restructure now and do things completely different because, we're starting from zero. We're a startup with 30 years of knowledge. So I don't know if that answers your question because I don't have a direct answer, but I know that it's at the top of my mind how we can utilize every opportunity of this shutdown to come back stronger. Like we say in all of our correspondence to our customers, we're going to be stronger out of this, but I really want that to be meaningful. And I'm only in a position to actually look at that now. There's been so many dark moments over the last few months. To be able to look forward right now and see positive and see people at G, even though we can't be together and hug and love each other up, we can still remotely see excitement for the first time on how we are actually going to be better on the other side of this.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm going to move to Juliet for our next question. And the question reads as follows. A concern of mine is the growing rate of voluntourism and the negative effect it's having on some very poor and vulnerable communities. How can we educate and help people make better choices, avoiding the pitfalls, as travelers with good intentions will always be looking to give back?
Such a great question. Thank you so much. What an important thing to look at. Again, we can't talk about volunteerism in general. We have to look at things case by case. And again, it's about educating ourselves and looking at the why we're doing it. Why are we doing volunteerism? Are we doing it for ourselves, or is it for the benefit of the greater community? So in practical terms, you obviously have to look at who you're going with, what you're doing, what your contribution is. Are you doing something that a local person in that community could be doing, such as building house, depriving someone of a job, just so you can take some virtue signaling pictures to chuck on social media, humanitarians of Tinder style, gross? Or, are you entering into some sort of skill exchange? Perhaps I could go somewhere and I could sit with, I have done this actually. I did it in Turks and Caicos. Shout out to those school kids there who were so inspiring, actually. To Grace, who is such a great storyteller in the making. So can I give her impart some skills? I've stayed in touch with her by email. Great. In terms of having, there are lots of NGOs and charities that partner to create holidays that G Adventures, I'm quite sure through your many options will have something where you are making a positive contribution actually yourself. There's a point to it. And perhaps if you're educating and learning about a certain challenge facing a community, whether it's citizen science through helping get data on marine biology, which can be quite laborious and costly to get, but just use a reputable partner and just again really think about the why you're doing that and what you are genuinely giving back.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. George, I'm going to move to you for the next question. And it is thinking about why you want to travel. can you ever take a beach holiday, a holiday for sunny, hot weather, as many people have scrambled for now, and turn that to a purposeful, meaningful trip?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think Juliet hit on something that's relevant to it. We cover, the world of citizen science, volunteer science, and in fact, we have a story just about turtle hatchlings that a program in Florida that's being supported by volunteer scientists. So I do think that there's a great way to do it. I mean, when you look at some of the conservation challenges in the world, so many of them have to do with our seas and with our coastal regions. And so there are usually great opportunities, whether it's something purely enjoyable like birding, whether it's an educational experience with kids about mangroves. There are a ton of things you can do on the beach to combine not just sun and fun, but learning about the relevance of that particular ecosystem. And so I think there's a lot out there. And I just also wanted to point out that Megan Aftersmith, who's a friend and colleague, put in the Q&A bar something about her Impact Travel Alliance, which also points out different ways travelers can make impact wherever they go. So not only in volunteer science, but a lot of other ways. So that's impacttravelalliance.org.
Can I make one addition, please?
Absolutely.
In all of this, purpose is also the arts. And I don't want us to forget that the arts are very important to these local communities. And one of the groups that I supported is an arts group in Cambodia. It goes straight to the community. It recovers and strengthens the community's identity. And it's music, it's dance, it's painting, whatever. But the arts, go to Jamaica for the music. I mean, you cannot, I think it's fun, but it's also very purposeful. And when we're thinking of being a travel, let's go with arts too.
Thank you both. And just to follow up, please, if anybody does want to add to these points, let's get the conversation going, right? These perspectives are incredibly valuable. Elizabeth, I'm actually going to stay with you now, and I've got a question for you. Is how do we keep from simply moving over tourism in one destination to the next hotspot?
It doesn't actually work that way. It's a very interesting question. There was something fundamentally boring about the choices for over tourism, where you could write 100 stories about a city or a place being overrun and people still went there. And so the consumer that contributes tended to be more sheep-like. So if you're going to avoid over tourism, be a little more individual. But underneath it all, it's the locale that needs to find the strength and the leverage to be able to control it. Mayor and I can't remember for sure which city, I think it was Amsterdam, said, it's like giving a dinner party for 12 and 12,000 show up. So the city cities have to find the leverage, and there are different ways you can do it that are invisible to keep the numbers down. Dubrovnik famously staggered the cruise ships and reduced the numbers. The cities have to, whereas Barcelona didn't have the control to do it. I could go on and on, it's mechanical, but it's very important. But as consumers, you can help those locales by not saying, oh, if it's so cool to go to Zambia right now, I'm going to flood this area. And it said be individualistic. But no, it's not. Go ahead, Juliet.
I completely agree. I think it's just going back to what, if you asked, I'm sure there's a correlation between if you asked all the people in these hotspots, Venice, historically, Machu Picchu, ask them their why did you go there? I think we're not going to get an answer that's so inspiring. So right, they're going to go because it looks nice, because I've seen it on Instagram, because it's famous, because I want to tell everyone else I went there. So again, if we ask ourselves the why we're going somewhere and we have a good answer for ourselves, I think it will lead us to better destinations, maybe.
Wonderful, thank you. Bruce, I'm going to go back to you, and I'd love to come back to the question of whether it's ethical to travel now. The question is, I know it isn't easy to answer, but I don't feel there was a direct answer given, and I'd love to hear more on this. So somebody, not me, is pushing on that question.
Well, from my perspective, I think and when you say now, like, is it immediately or like in the short term? I mean, today, I think it's an individual decision. I think everyone agrees that non-essential travel right now is not something that anyone would suggest. But if they're talking about when borders start to open and when people are allowed to travel and there's inherent risk prior to a vaccine, I think it's your choice, and I do think you can do it in an ethical way. I think the world needs people to travel. I think local communities need people to travel. I think there's a right way to do it when people decide they want to travel. I hope people will be more mindful in their decisions. If we get anything out of this pandemic, I hope that a small group of people understand the power and privilege that they have when they decide to travel. You know, there's so few people on this planet that have that luxury to say, I'm bored with my present community environment and I want to travel to somewhere else to see another community environment. This is a luxury that we have. It's not a right, it's a privilege that we have in the developed world. And if we get anything out of that is that more people just understand the power and privilege you have when you simply decide you want to travel, and take that seriously in every decision you make when you want to explore, because we naturally want to explore. We're as human beings. And so, yes, I do think that when the borders open, we need the will to travel. I say that selfishly because I own a travel company, of course, but I also speak on communities we're trying to help and support that are devastated by the fact that tourism has come to a halt. So, yeah, I don't know if that's popular or unpopular, but that's my thoughts on that topic.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I'm gonna kind of stay on that topic to bring things home today, and I'm gonna go around. I was gonna say room, but you look like this actually right now. So I'm gonna go around the room, and I've got a question on that power and privilege. And the question is, what are some of the best ways to ensure the money I spend on travel stays in the individual communities, to make sure the most amount of money stays with that local economy? How about I start with George on that one?
I think there are a ton of resources. I mean, Juliet's written a book on it. The macro picture about how tourism economies are constructed was written by Elizabeth. I think the responsibility comes down to the individual. It is possible to make better choices. It's possible to stay in locally owned places. It's possible to eat in locally owned restaurants. It's possible to stay longer and possibly have fewer trips over the course of a year. So I guess maybe I'm hard on the individual in some sense, but I really think it's incumbent upon individual travelers to be engaged in the decisions that they make and to do a little bit more research. And, and if that means be a little bit more interesting and unique in their choices, I mean, I'm all for it. That's what we want, is to distribute the opportunity that is tourism as broadly as possible. And what that takes, at least on the consumer level, is to make more of a claim and to own your power.
Wonderful. Thank you, George. And listen, I know there's a lot of alignment on this topic, so it's not the easiest to go around with. But Julia, would you like to take a stab?
In terms of what?
Apologies. Yeah, just the last question we had, and we wanted to end on this note. Is just what are some simple things people can do to keep their money in the community when they're traveling?
So first of all, you can read Bruce's book, which explains leakage. Secondly, just always have communitarianism as, let's make that a buzzword front of mind. Every single time we spend any money, we should be thinking about who we're giving it to and where it's going and the impact of that money. Like some people won't eat palm oil. They look at the certain packaging. It's just thinking every single time when we travel, when we're home, whatever economy, who am I giving it to? Is it staying with the person who's made this or provided this service? All of that. It's just, it's kind of common sense once you cultivate that instinct. It's, and not always, it's interesting because, they've got these big companies and the reason they're profitable is because they find ways of taking as much money as possible. But I think it's, we're being down on things. I want to say something really profound, and that it's a profound fact, is that last year, the Business Roundtable top 500 or 200 CEOs in America, they decided to put stakeholders before shareholders. So that means businesses thinking about how their business and affects all of the people around them, and not just how much money they make for their shareholders. So I think it's really, it's fun actually, just always like think of your brain. Don't always rely on apps and other resources. Your brain is an app. You know, just always, who am I giving my money to? How much is staying with them? Are they good people? Do they deserve it? That's it.
Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Two things. First of all, practice being a tourist in your own place, your own city. You know what's local. Just be a tourist for a couple of days. Go to the church that you haven't gone to in a while or ever. Find out what's the best museum for you. Do a lot of tourism in your own place, and then you'll be a better educated tourist when you go overseas. I mean, I've seen people go to churches and haven't a clue what they're looking at, and our mosque and so on and so forth. We're lucky in DC, we can be tourists in our own place, but do it. And then if you can figure out what's community in your place, you'll do a better job there. And secondly, don't be cheap. Tip the locals really well. It drives me nuts when I see people who are on these great trips and they are cheap. So those are the two.
Power, privilege, don't be cheap. I like that one as well. Yeah. Bruce, I'm going to pass it back to you to give your 2 cents on the topic, but also I'm going to pass it to you to send us home and wrap things up. So I just want to say thank you to the panel. Back to Bruce. Here we go.
Just to add to what you said, Elizabeth, about, you know, we know what to do. I mean, asking this question, people know what to do. And you can, if you need to practice at home, it's just about asking questions. It's just about taking things, all the information is there. Let me tell you, if there's any company that's doing anything with local communities, it's all over their website. The information is everywhere. They're going to tell you about it. They're not going to hide it. So you just have to do a little bit of work. You just have to scratch the surface and understand the power you have when you decide to purchase anything, not just travel. I just don't think there's a big, some secret advice that we can impart wisdom on people, because naturally we know. But when you ask the question, just don't be afraid of the answer, because sometimes companies that you love and support aren't doing what you think they are doing. And so I just think that, so in answer to your question first, Chris, is just, people know what to do. Ask questions, pick up the phone. If the person on the other end of the phone that's actually just a salesperson that's taking your order, if they don't know what the company's doing, then the company's not doing anything. Because if they're doing something, everyone in that company will know about it. And you just have to stop and ask a few questions. So thank you. This has been so good. I'm going to miss you guys now. Already. Like, honestly, this has been so good. I'd like to have continued on. I just want to say quickly, George, my fondness for you. National Geographic and the great work they've done for 127 or 28 years of discovery, exploration, and brand integrity. It's a world leader. Elizabeth, you've been a leader with your writing, but your book specifically has been such a beacon for people who were in the dark, and we need people like you that bring people into the light. And Juliette, it's so great to see you again, because you're such an amazing storyteller and so passionate, and I am actually a big fan of Condé Nast, because I was an award winner for when they did their World Saver Awards years and years ago. It was a thankless job, and people wondered what the heck is Condé Nast Travelers doing with the World Saver.
Still some work to be done.
They still had the intention, and they and I've always just appreciated them for taking those stands and being. So this has just been a great topic. So thank you all for all of your insightful answers. I think this was packed with a lot of information for our travelers. I thank everyone for staying online. We still have lots of people listening, even though we ran a little bit late. And Chris, I'm telling, and Casey and I know Leah from my side, I love this panel. So can we get this panel again, maybe weekly? But again, for sure, I want to see you guys again, because the answers were amazing, and I think we offered so much insight for people and answered so many questions. So thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank
And I do
you.
want to take
Thank you.
just one opportunity. Sorry, on that note, it was a great conversation and there is so much reading. So I want to plug your books one more time because you probably won't do it. So Elizabeth's book, Overbooked, The Exploding Business of Travel and Tourism. Juliet's new title, The Green Edit, Travel, Easy Tips for the Eco-Friendly Traveler, right there. And Bruce's Insta book, Unlearn the Year the Earth Stood Still, at www.unlearn.travel. And of course, the brilliant source of travel journalism and inspiration, our friends at nationalgeographic.com. Please be sure to check those out. Keep the conversation going with you and your friends. Back to you, Bruce.
Back to me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.